Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Property management isn't always glamorous, but it is the glue that makes your real estate portfolio stick together and makes your monthly cash flow recur. Whether you're doing it yourself or you use a professional manager, what are the property management mistakes that you must avoid? And what are some important management techniques that you've never thought about before? And how can property management be made easier today on Get Rich Education? Fortunately for you, Congress has made it possible to get up to $200,000 out of your current 401k or TSP to invest in real estate or your own business, and that's even if you're still working. The thing is, you can get all this money tax-free. The EQRP is your secret weapon. With the CARES Act expiring soon, the EQRP company helps you unleash your retirement funds now. Learn more and text message QRP in all capital letters to 72,000.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE, from Warren, New Jersey to Warren, Michigan, and across 188 nations worldwide. I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education. It's remarkable how real estate investing spans the gamut from big picture to small scale. 2 weeks ago, economist Richard Duncan and I went macro, how the pandemic will impact inflation, and will there be a global depression? Last week, you got a big dose of me, and we really built your compelling why for real estate when I discussed the up to 5 simultaneous ways that real estate pays you. This week, we winnow down and go smaller yet, but this is highly actionable for you because we're discussing how you can manage your properties more efficiently to save both your time and your money. I'm coming to you from the Queen City and New York State's second most populated city today here. Of course, second only to New York City. This is Buffalo, New York. And it sure is strange traveling in the pandemic, as I expect to fly to Anchorage, Alaska today. Before we discuss property management, let's get you up to date on residential real estate's general direction. This is CNBC's real estate correspondent Diana Olick on the new home price sales spike in June. So this is chiefly about the volume of new construction home sales. As you know, more turnkey providers than ever have tilted into new construction homes because so many places are out of inventory. You just need to build more. So this is important for you if you happen to have new construction as a preference. This update is less than 2 minutes in length.
Sales were strongest in the Northeast with an 86% annual jump, and in Florida, where sales popped 84%. California did see gains, but it was the laggard, and those sales are allowing builders to raise prices. About 57% of those surveyed said they had bumped prices higher. Only again in California did prices pull back some. Now, this is in line with a June sales report from Taylor Morrison last week. The Arizona-based public home builder reported a 94% annual jump in June sales to a record pace. CEO Cheryl Palmer said buyers are looking for new, high-tech homes with more individual rooms to allow for home office and, of course, homeschooling. Several big builders will be reporting earnings in the next few weeks. The issue for builders going forward, though, is how to meet all this new demand. Lack of land and actively selling communities will keep starts from accelerating, and social distancing slows work pace. So it's hard to start new communities because land acquisitions were put on hold and some jurisdictions are not back to their normal staffing. Andrew?
Hey, Diana, how much of this do you think is being driven by COVID? This idea that people want to build a new home, create spaces for distance learning in schools and all of these sort of new things we talk about? Or do you think that this was just pent up demand from before?
I think it's part of it is pent up demand. Part of it is the fact that we have such a low supply of existing homes for sale. But the builders are saying a lot of it is people wanting to get the new high-tech homes, get more space for homeschooling, home office, et cetera, and also looking to get outside of cities, which is where builders are mostly present. So they're moving farther out, farther away from inner cities. And again, it's also a lot easier to tour a newly built home or even to go to a model or tour it virtually because everything is exactly the same. Getting into an existing existing home is harder now because of social distancing, it's just much easier to go new.
Yeah, so demand for new construction single-family homes is high, and that's concentrated in suburban demand. And like I discussed here several weeks ago, before I even heard it reported in major media, like CNBC just said there, home buyers and tenants increasingly look for homes with more individual rooms. So more smaller rooms for home offices and even for homeschooling. Really, all three of our Florida providers are furnishing this in-demand, brand new construction single-family stock that does tend to be in the suburbs. You can learn more and see available investment property at either GetRichEducation.com/Jacksonville or GetRichEducation.com/Orlando or GetRichEducation.com/Tampa. Florida is where people are moving, leading the nation in net in-migration. Now, when it comes to the management of your property, you have two primary choices. Either do-it-yourself landlording, which is what I did at the beginning of my real estate investing career, or the other choice is hiring out a professional property manager to handle everything for you, all of the tenant and the maintenance relations, and that's what I've done for about 12 years now. And it's not just my out-of-state properties either. Even the properties that I own in my own hometown are professionally managed. Now, I'll tell you, if I did not have a professional property manager and I did it myself, well, then I would have more monthly cash flow, yes, because I would not be paying their fees, but I'd have less time in my life and my income would not be so passive. Now, should you ever self-manage your own property at all? Well, you don't ever have to manage. It's not mandatory, but if you do, it does help you throughout your investment lifespan somewhat, as you better understand things from the manager's perspective. As you know, I've been a direct real estate investor for 18 years now. Gosh, that's a little hard to say and believe, as I do hear myself say that out loud, but I'm willing to pay a manager for that peace of mind. It's worth something to me that a broken bathroom fan in Unit 11 doesn't occupy any of my headspace, and I can devote my thoughts and my time to things that I love. I'm also not very good at fixing broken stuff. That is just not in my skill set. Maybe it is your skill set, and if it is, well, then you might want to self-manage your properties. We're talking about helping the do-it-yourself landlord today. And even if you use a professional manager, there are some lessons here. In fact, we're talking about a popular online tool that's grown such that it's now being used by over 200,000 do-it-yourself landlords. We're talking to the founder of that platform today. When property management is done right, your profits are higher and your tenants are probably happier too. When property management is done wrong, you are stressed out and crying into your pillow at night. So let's talk about streamlining your management. Today's guest and his family immigrated to the United States when he was 10 years old from Johannesburg, South Africa, prior to launching his online property management platform that he runs today, which is called Avail, A-V-A-I-L. He spent 7 years in data analytics, including at Goldman Sachs. He and his co-founder, what they did is they came up with the idea for their company On a Napkin that's an all-in-one software solution for do-it-yourself landlords. And this platform includes things like the ability for you to list properties, host rental applications, create and sign digital lease agreements, collect rent, and manage those pesky tenant maintenance requests all online and in one central place. So this solves the problem that do-it-yourself landlords have. It makes for a better experience for tenants in a lot of cases too, so it really improves the life of both landlords and tenants. Our guest is also a longtime real estate investor himself with a focus on 3-unit multifamily properties, and he uses Avail to manage his own 6 rental units daily so that he can spend more time on the weekends with his family. Welcome to Get Rich Education, Lawrence Jankalo.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited.
Before we talk about making property management easier, tell us about your own investing a little bit and why the 3-unit properties. And I think that these are 3 flats in Chicago.
Yeah, that's correct. I've got 2-3 flats. I'd actually started with a single unit condo when I first started. It was a condo that I had bought and lived in. And then, I got married and quickly ran out of space. And so moved out, and I actually turned out renting that unprofitably because it's really hard to do that with a condo with assessments. And so that was really the start of why I'm like, okay, if one unit's too hard to turn a good profit on, potentially 3 units are better. And I don't know that it's necessarily a passion for 3 units. It's just in Chicago, if you want something here that's profitable and close to where you live, you're kind of forced into the 3 flats because that's what's so common in Chicago. You got these beautiful brownstones and graystones, and they're all 100 years old. They got a lot of charm, a lot of deferred maintenance. And so that's the natural trap. If you're going to get started, that's kind of where you're going to go. So that's what I have.
Isn't that the way it so often works? You end up renting out a property like that first condo that you had that you used to live in yourself. And then oftentimes people learn that, oh, well, this isn't actually that profitable, just renting this place out that I used to live in. You probably got the preferable owner-occupied financing on it. But typically, yes, you need to move into something with more units and more economies of scale in a lot of markets in order to make that profitable. And 2 flats and 3 flats in Chicago are often popular. That's just the name of the construction style for 2-unit and 3-unit buildings in Chicago. These properties were built typically between 100 and 120 years ago. You mentioned all the deferred maintenance on them. It's really part of the character and the charm of Chicago. Brooklyn has their brownstones. Philadelphia has their row houses. Chicago has their 2 and 3 flats.
Exactly. And the thing with the single unit condo, that kind of investment is more opportunistic investment. You bought it maybe, or I bought it, for an emotional reason, right? I bought it because I wanted to live in it. It was nice. I could see myself there. So I pay a fee or a price for it that you wouldn't do if you were an investor buying it. And so those opportunistic investors tend to buy their first unit, something that they lived in, and then you'll quickly realize it doesn't make money. A lot of investors will then give up at that point. And then you kind of have to, if you want to continue, kind of restart, rethink your strategy, and realize that when you make your money on the property is kind of when you buy it with the right mindset, something that's going to be profitable and wasn't an emotional purchase.
Now, Lawrence, I think of the discipline of property management as a problem-fraught industry. From a leaky kitchen faucet to a noisy tenant that disrupts other tenants to a late tenant rent payment. So talk to us about do-it-yourself landlords. Oftentimes, those do-it-yourself landlords are small time. They have a small portfolio. Tell us about how they handle all these various rental property problems.
If you've got fewer units, you're going to have fewer problems just by the nature of it, right? If you've got 6 toilets, only 6 can break versus 1,000 toilets. So you find that if you've got fewer, it's easier to do it yourself in a way. But the problems are the same, whether you're doing it yourself or you have a professional do it for you. Stuff breaks, you need to fix it. You're going to have to pay for those things. And then the trade-off comes to, do you have the time to go in and manage it yourself? Or do you have the excess capital spinning off from the property to pay a professional for it? Right. And for me personally, with the 2 buildings I have, if I were to use a professional property manager, I'd find that those buildings are no longer really profitable for me. So, the choice is like, in that case is obvious. I have to manage it myself to keep the kind of return I want. I'm looking for something that's going to give me a 10% annual cash on cash return. And the second I pay someone $1,000 to find me a tenant or 10% of my rent, that essentially eats the return I want. I go down the path of managing it myself simply for that reason. We find a lot of our customers have that mindset as well. But it's not for everyone, for sure. When problems come up, you have to be available to solve them. So for people who are looking for true passive income, a property manager will be better. That being said, even when you have a property manager, you're still going to get phone calls from the property manager. It just won't be from the tenant. And that property manager will ask, can I do this? Can I do that? Frequently. So it's a trade-off.
Yeah. You know that I do use professional property management for all of my properties. I self-managed my properties for the first 6 or 7 years until I turned it over. Unfortunately, I had things well tuned in enough with my preferences that none of my managers call me. They just know that's just too intrusive of a thing to do in most cases, unless there's a real emergency. They often email me. So even as the investor dealing with a professional property manager, there is that buffer between the tenant and I, and that helps remove some of the emotions that are there with the property. But yeah, there are still things that I need answer to. For example, do we want to fix this parking lot or repave this parking lot or fix a dishwasher or replace a dishwasher. So there are still those things that come up. It's just typically not too intrusive once I have things tuned in. But one certainly can save a substantial amount of money if they are a do-it-yourselfer, especially for those with a smaller portfolio. And when you are a do-it-yourselfer, you often have more knowledge and more intimacy on the week-to-week operations of your own properties.
Well, I like the path you took, which was, start off as a do-it-yourselfer and learn the intricacies. And I think that's hugely important if down the road you do want a property manager, because you're going to need to vet that property manager pretty heavily. Sometimes, the interests aren't aligned between the owner and the manager. The manager, it's not their money, so they don't take the same sense of ownership that an owner would. They don't necessarily always vet the contractors or choose the lowest bid or highest quality, lowest bid trade-off for you. Oftentimes, they have relationships with contractors where they receive kickbacks. So it's important that you've done it yourself at some point so you know what to look for and you know if the property manager is doing what they're supposed to do.
That's a good point, because markups on contractor invoices from property managers are actually a fairly common thing in the industry. If you need to have some plumbing work done and the plumber submits that quote to your property manager, the manager might put that quote on their manager letterhead and mark that up 10 or 15%.
Yeah, you're right. They'll often have to mark up invoices, and I don't blame them. It's something that they have to do in a way to make money. They're not in the business of it for free. That's their job. They need it. So there's something good about it. You're helping with job creation in a way when you're using a property manager. Because you're doing that, they need to make a living. There's going to be that markup. I don't blame them for it. It's just you have to know that, and that's what you're paying for.
That's right. It's just something to be aware of that often isn't apparent to new investors beyond what is more typical, which is the monthly management fee and then the leasing fee, which is a % of the rent when a new tenant comes in. So let's talk more about just what a property manager does and how a do-it-yourselfer can do it themselves. Instead, there can be so much for a new landlord to know. It's very interesting. When one goes and buys a rental property for the first time, unless they outsource the property management, it's just like they are, christened as a property manager. It doesn't take any formal education or any sort of qualification course to be a landlord, but there is a lot to know instantly. One might need to know, for example, the local landlord and tenant law, which varies by state. They might need to know about pets and pet deposits and late fees and rekeying locks between tenancies and just how to set the right rent amount in the first place. And are they going to do ongoing inspections? And there's really a lot of things to juggle here for just say a brand new do-it-yourself landlord. So tell us more about how one balances that.
I think of it in a lot of ways. It's similar to becoming a parent for the first time. There's no real instruction booklet.
Right.
You all of a sudden you have this thing that you have responsibilities for that you didn't realize what those were, and now you're going to learn on the job in a way. When you buy your first property, there's really two jobs that you're doing, and the industry calls them these two. So the first one is really kind of this leasing job or a leasing agent that you have to be. The second one is the property manager. And oftentimes those can be two separate people, but if you're doing it yourself, you're the sole person here. And as a leasing agent, you're responsible for making sure that there are tenants in the unit. So finding those tenants, screening them, making sure they're going to pay their rent on time, and then ultimately getting them in a lease. And, as you mentioned, there's a lot of regulation and compliance requirements in that process alone. The lease itself has to be state or city specific. The way you go about finding those tenants, there are ordinances that even go down to the city and municipality level that you have to be aware of. And so that's the first job, is always trying to make sure that you keep the place occupied, because a vacancy is really going to ruin the place, ruin your income on it, but also any kind of vacancy creates additional maintenance. Pipes just sit there or whatever it is. And then the second job is as the property manager. So now once you've got tenants, your job isn't over. It's not like you can just sit back and do nothing. You now have a responsibility to maintain the property, keep it in working condition, handle all the maintenance, be on call for when things do break. And then obviously the fun part of it, which is then collect the rent and make sure you're getting the income that you got from this. So there's a whole slew of things that you have to do that you kind of get thrust to if this is your very first time doing it, which not a big deal. You learn on the job, and there's not any mistakes you can make. They're going to be life-threatening in a way. So just know going into it that it's going to be a pretty steep learning curve.
That's right. A lot of it is on the job education. And yeah, I really like how you draw the parallel between becoming a parent for the first time. There's no certification course that you must take to be a mother or father either. So just like with any successful business and any successful investor needs to think about the real estate investing as a business is often a collection of people and systems. So tell us about implementing some of those systems for these really two parts of the property management discipline that you've talked about, which is leasing and then the ongoing management itself.
I'll try to avoid jumping straight into Avail for a second, because that's essentially what we provide is both the process, system, and knowledge there. But
Right.
if you're going to start, or even if you've been doing it a while, one of the key things you're going to want is a process and some consistency. That's hugely important for several reasons. The first is just from a legal perspective. You can't treat tenants differently. You might be violating fair housing if you were to give a tenant a break on late fees and not another tenant, or if you were to lease in a certain way to one person or screen one person a certain way and another in a different way. You'd be violating some fair housing laws. So one thing is create a process that's going to allow you to be consistent. And then that process is something that makes it easy for you to keep repeating every year as you get turnover and as you're finding new tenants. You don't have to try to remember what was it that I did last year. You can refer back to whatever process you wrote down. Besides the process, you want some system to help you. I know a lot of landlords, when they first get started, go down the path of using something like Excel to keep organized, and that's their system, and they'll keep their rent roll in Excel, or they'll use forms that they get from Staples or lease agreements they get from Staples, and you want something. Now, I'm not advocating for those are the things you want, but definitely get a process and get all of your tools set up. Get your standard lease agreement set up, get your standard rental application, find a place where you're going to get credit reports or eviction checks done, figure out what path you're going to collect rent through, whether you want your tenants driving by your bank and depositing it directly or putting it in a lockbox or mailing you the check or paying online. You want to try to figure out all those things and have that be very easy for your tenants, because if you make it easy for your tenants, you're going to make it easy for yourself.
Well, why shouldn't landlords just use forms that they can get off the internet and then collect rent by cash or by check and keep things simple? We're going to answer that question and more. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Our guest is Lawrence Jankalo. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Property investors can get killed with maintenance costs. That's less likely when you buy brand new construction. Let me tell you about JWB Real Estate Capital in bustling Jacksonville, Florida. They pioneered the build-to-rent model where you can invest in new construction, turnkey rental property. That's why JWB was featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. To learn more and see inventory, start now at newconstructionturnkey.com. The people that our listeners can't stop talking about are Ridge Lending Group and MLS 42056. They provided you with more loans than anyone. It's where I got my last few loans, and they finance single-family income property up to fourplexes. They're the #1 lender for both beginners and veterans. Start your pre-qualification, chat with President Chaley Ridge personally, and you'll end up with your custom plan for expanding your cash flowing portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is Rich Dad Advisor Ken McElroy. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. We're talking with Lawrence Jankalo. He's the co-founder of Vail to help do-it-yourself landlords manage their properties. Let's talk about some trends that are taking place here in this time. A couple of those really are smart home technology as that continues to increase and be more prevalent in properties. I also want to ask you about COVID-19 adjustments to property management. But first, tell us about some of that smart home technology and how that changes the landscape with property management. I'm talking about things like controlling a thermostat with your phone, for example, Lawrence.
Smart home technology's definitely been a trend in higher luxury rentals for a while. It makes it easier on the management side to have like a system where you can enter the unit through automated door locks or something like that and not have to have the tenant give you keys or leave keys behind or manage keys. Well, key maintenance for a landlord who's got 1,000 units is a really big problem. So on higher end luxury buildings with 200, 300 units, that's already been a trend. And yeah, you're right. We're starting to see that now with other landlords as well. If you're considering doing smart home technology for your rental properties, I think you really have to consider what kind of rental you have and what kind of tenant you're trying to attract. Some tenants won't appreciate it at all, and it's not going to do much for rent increases. So then if that's the case, you want to decide, does it make the management easier for you? If you've only got 1 or 2 units, you probably don't have a key management issue, so maybe it doesn't help so much there. But otherwise, if it is important to your tenants, you could see some substantial rent increases from having some smart home technology. Even more than that, you might find that tenants are willing to stay longer than normal. And then that has a huge impact on the expenses you have when things are turning over. Some of the easy smart home technology, obviously, are door locks. That really helps you a lot. I think smart thermostats are really important as well. I've had several times my tenants call me and say, hey, went on vacation, it's the middle of winter, and we forgot to turn the heat back on. And normally I would have to drive over there and then turn the heat on. But if you've got smart thermostats, I just go into my phone and turn it back on. So I know that the heating is working. So there's a bunch of ways that helps you with your maintenance. I'd recommend it. But again, it really depends on the nature of the rental and the target tenant you're trying to attract.
Right. Often it's going to take exceeding a certain property price threshold in order for one to integrate more of that smart home technology. Of course, COVID-19 is a crisis that's changed so many things, including with rent collection and government programs to be there to provide unemployment compensation in order to keep that tenant paying the rent and so on. But how has this changed things from your side with what you're seeing with property management, Lawrence?
For landlords, this has been a trying time. And for renters too, obviously, they're the ones who get hit as well. But I think a lot of renters don't realize that most landlords are also just kind of everyday working class citizens. A lot of our customers, we've got 200,000 of them. The majority of them have their regular day-to-day jobs and they do landlording on the side. And even with COVID now, you see a lot of those landlords also lost their jobs. And we saw that a lot of tenants lost theirs. We actually did a survey in late March of this year. It was focused more on the tenants. So we had 10,000 tenants respond to our survey, and something like 54% of them, even as early as March when the pandemic was just starting, had said they already lost their jobs due to COVID-19. So we knew early that there was going to be a huge problem. I think fortunately, some of the government stimulus checks that came out and some of the unemployment stuff came out just in time because we didn't really see a lot of decline in rent payments being made through the system. It was really minor, a little bit of a decrease, but for the vast majority of landlords, rent was still being paid. And we could see that just too with the survey. We asked renters, what are you going to do? Are you going to pay your rent? And almost all of them said they wanted to continue paying their rent if they could figure out how. And so I think that all came together in a nice way, unlike what the media tries to report. They try to fear monger and so they can get clickbait, get click eyes on there. But in reality, we saw that nothing super bad happened. A lot of the stimulus that was is set to end at the end of July. And so we'll see if the trend starts to get worse there.
That's right.
As far as managing the property, we're definitely seeing a lot more. Both renters and landlords want to move more contactless. So for our business, which is a key component of what we do, we've seen a lot of landlords sign up to collect rent online so they don't have to touch a physical check that may have fingerprints on it. We're seeing a lot of renters don't want to lick an envelope with a check inside. And so we've seen a huge boost there. We also saw something really weird happen in the industry because we've got 7 years of data that show when listings happen and tenant screening happens. And we saw a shift. Normally the peak of the season is July and August. And we've seen it's been shifted what looks like by a month or two. So the season has kind of moved down a little bit. We saw a lot of tenants move to month or do lease renewals for a short period of time. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with seasonality going forward.
Yeah, like you mentioned, a lot of tenants don't realize a landlord's financial situation. In fact, in my experience, most tenants don't ever realize or think about the fact that a landlord often has a mortgage on the property that they need to pay. So in this era where we've had this pandemic-driven eviction moratorium at times, we've also had mortgage loan forbearance. So interestingly, we've been talking about rent collections. You mentioned you have 200,000 users using your platform Avail, which is an awesome measure of success there. Congratulations. And I know that you happen to have 400,000 units. So if you think about 200,000 landlords or users with 400,000 units, that tells you, hey, the average mom and pop landlord there, that's who they are. They really are pretty small, an average of about 2 units per user. Have you found, since you do have all these users, that although there's still been a high rate of paying the rent through the pandemic, have the payments come much later?
Yeah, so 2 comments there. To validate some of the numbers you mentioned, the U.S. Census does put out data on how many landlords there are and how many properties they have. And there's 8 million landlords with less than 10 units in the United States.
Great stat.
Yeah, 44 million rental units. 24 million of those are owned by those 8 million landlords. So on average, it's 3 units, and they own 53% of the rental market. So the vast majority of landlords are small 3-unit, 3, 2, or 1 unit do-it-yourself landlords. We did see rent move a little later. So the first part that we saw was April. First, rent pushed back a little bit. We saw an average delay of that by a couple days. And I think the stimulus checks that went out, then we saw a spike as those started rolling out for April rent being paid. And then we saw the same thing happening in May. There was huge lines to even try to get unemployment. So as soon as those started clearing, we saw that May also had a spike in rent. And so, yeah, there was a little bit of slippage on late rent. We also saw that most of our landlords were forgiving, so they didn't end up charging late fees. They understood the situation.
Yeah.
They worked with their tenants. And I think, honestly, the whole pandemic has proven to be that landlords and renters can get along better than I think people expected.
Right. And the rate of those payments being made certainly is higher than what I had even expected in my most optimistic outlook. Talk to us about why landlords shouldn't necessarily just be using forms that they can get off the internet and then collect rent by cash or check and just kind of do this on the fly by the seat of their pants sort of way. Tell us more about how they can centralize and streamline things for themselves.
Boy, so many reasons. The first one is if you get some random form from Staples or some other place or online, those tend to not be compliant with where your property is located. We're in Chicago here. Chicago's got strict rules, and we're not even the strictest. New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles are so strict and so tenant friendly that if you use one of those forms, you open yourself up to a lot of legal liability. As an example, in Chicago, if you don't pay interest on a security deposit or provide a security deposit receipt, which wouldn't be included if you buy your standard forms. No one's going to tell you if you buy a form from Staples that you need to provide a receipt when you take a security deposit. If you don't do that, the tenant here in Chicago can sue you for 3 times the rent or 3 times the security deposit. So you open yourself up to tremendous liability. And so you want something or someone to give you that knowledge and guidance. And a property manager is a great way to do that. However, obviously it's super expensive, as we mentioned. So then you want some sort of alternative potentially, and that's where Avail comes in, I think, for most people, which is to help give them that process and that education, move stuff online so that you have everything you need. Where a property manager and a do-it-yourselfer are different is really just the systems and processes. So if you can find a place where you can create a listing and it goes to everywhere a property manager or broker would put it and it's automated, then you're getting exposure where you need it. If you have a way to hook into the credit bureaus to get a credit score and eviction check on a tenant, why wouldn't you want that? That's what a property manager is going to do, but why pay the $1,000 a month for that or $1,000 for a tenant for that when you can get it basically at cost otherwise? So Avail tries to get you through all that, gives you the process. And so we'll do the listing for you. You'll create it. We'll syndicate it to everywhere where tenants are looking. We'll give you access to the credit report, eviction check. We'll give you a state and city-specific lease that your tenants would sign online. We'll allow your renters to log into their own portal, make their rent payments, submit maintenance requests. All of this is managed in one place, so it's really easy for you as a landlord. And then ultimately, not only do you get that liability decrease for making a wrong mistake, but you also get your time back. So a lot of the reasons why some people don't want to be a do-it-yourself landlord is they're worried about how much time it's going to suck. But if you can find a system, and Avail is one of several that are out there, I think we're the best, we're the most full-featured, but there are others. But if you can find any system like ours, you're going to get all that time back. And now, in my opinion, it's no longer a trade-off between cost and time. You can have both if you're using something like us.
I'm on the Avail website right now, avail.co. I look under the tab for landlords, which is what our listeners are most interested in. I see about 10 different options. So tell us about 1 or 2 of these. For landlords, I'm looking at how there is a space for rental listings, rental applications, tenant screening, credit, criminal, and eviction reports, digital leases, online rent collection, something called fast pay, maintenance tracking, rent price analysis, because you do need to figure out what the market rent is for these properties before you bring a tenant in, and then finally, rental property calculator. Are there any there that are specifically poignant for real estate investors today?
For today, for sure, with this pandemic and everyone wants to go contactless, I think the most important thing for people right now is probably the online rent payments. So allowing your tenants to pay online and making it easy for them. That allows them to do 2 things. They can pay directly from their bank account or from a credit card if they needed to put it on a on debt for a short period of time. It really increases the options for the renter. And then from a safety perspective, you just don't want to open an envelope that someone's just recently licked. And as a landlord, if you're receiving 10, 15 checks in a given month, depending on how large of a property owner you are, you're just putting yourself at risk. And certainly for renters, the last thing you want to do is stuff an envelope with a check and go to the mailbox and get stamps. So in a time like this, where you can go contactless payments, that's probably the feature most important for people right now.
Maybe for a landlord that currently has a property manager that they're dissatisfied with and they cannot find an adequate replacement, this could therefore be an option for them using something like Avail. So it is do-it-yourselfing. Some people even do do-it-yourself landlording from a distance. Over the past few years, I've been surprised at the number of people that can do this, and they can do it with a tool like Avail. One reason why there's an advantage here over using a professional property manager is the savings in costs, like you talked about. Typically, with a property manager, you have two main fees that you pay that manager. Say you have a unit that rents for $1,200 as an investor. Well, you need to pay a management fee, which is often 10% of the monthly rent amount. So you're losing $120 a month there. And then the second fee is most commonly a leasing fee. Whenever a new tenant comes in after the previous one vacated the property, you need to pay 1/2 month's rent to 1 month's rent as a leasing fee. So that would be another $600 to $1,200 each time that you have a tenant turn. Tell us about the cost of Avail compared to that.
Well, one thing I'll mention first is for do-it-yourselfers. Now, this is going to sound so cliche, maybe even rotten in a way, but do-it-yourself to us doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it alone. We tend to think of what we offer as Avail as the support mechanism for do-it-yourself landlords. So we probably one of the few people out there who offer 7 days a week customer service where you can call in and talk to someone. So as far as pricing goes, I think it's uncomparable in a way. If you want to get started with Avail, any number of units from 1 to 1,000 to whatever, it's actually entirely free. You can get started, create your account, explore it, do all of the features that were mentioned when you listed off those 7 or 10 features. All of that's free. There are some premium things that you would potentially upgrade for, but by no means are we salesy or try to push you into that. Fast pay is one of those. So normally we process rent in 3 business days. If it was important to you to get it a lot faster, then you might want to upgrade your account. If you want to customize the lease, now we give you a state and city specific lease, but if you wanted to edit a clause, change the rules, make some changes yourself, you'd upgrade, and that upgrade fee is $5 per unit per month. So even at that level, I know you mentioned $120 per unit per month for a property manager. This is considerably less than that.
Now, of course, you're not the only platform that offers an all-in-one place do-it-yourself landlord platform like this. There are platforms out there like AppFolio and Buildium that do similar things. What are the differences between Avail and those other platforms?
Yeah, no, that's actually a great question. And I actually like those platforms. They actually do really well and are brilliant. The big difference between them is the size landlord that they are built for and catered to. So both AppFolio and Buildium cater to larger landlords, those with 200 or more units. And you can see that when you're going through their UI or their portal. You can see how it's architected. It's really clunky for someone with 1 to 9 units or a beginner landlord. They're expecting that you know what to do and how to do it already. And they're really just they're all about efficiency. They're not about education or guidance. And we take the opposite. We're focused on landlords who have 9 or fewer units, who want a process, want some handholding, want to be told what to do and when, and use kind of our built-in process through the features. So that's the big difference. And then the user experience is remarkably better for you because we're built for someone with fewer units.
Yeah, and I've seen evidence of that on your website where you help guide people through things. That's your niche, people that often own just 1 to 9 units, which is, like we mentioned, the majority of the portfolio sizes that investors have. Was there any last thing that we should know about Avail that's really important for our listeners, Lawrence?
I think we covered a really good amount here. One of the things that's probably as true for real estate as it is for Avail is you try it. If you're thinking about getting started in real estate, the sooner you do it, the better you can learn and you get started. And I think that's true of our software as well. There's nothing to lose. If it sounds intriguing or it sounds like it could help your business, you don't take any risk by creating an account and exploring and seeing if it's right for you. So that'd be what I'd want to leave listeners with is, give it a go. And, if you don't like it, contact us. Let us know. We have a really tight product roadmap that we iterate on very quickly. So feedback's important to us.
Yeah, this could be an excellent tool for that do-it-yourself landlord, especially those with a smaller portfolio. Lawrence, what's the best way for a person to check out a bill?
They can come directly to our homepage. Normally, I'd love to say go to some specific URL and get a rebate or coupon, but it's free. So check us out at avail.co, avail.co.
Real estate's made more ordinary people wealthy than anything else, but property management is really the glue that makes this entire thing stick together and the thing that makes that cash flow recur. Lawrence Jankalo, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, good material from Lawrence. And here's an option for you to centralize your management if you're a do-it-yourselfer. I largely don't have smart home technology in my properties. I think you know that my mission is to provide housing that's clean, safe, affordable, and functional, but little more than that mission right there. Now, maybe you're wondering, is there a minimum standard? Like, what is the lowest threshold that I absolutely must furnish to my tenants? Well, yeah, there is something. Legally in the United States, and I would expect it to be similar elsewhere, there's something that most jurisdictions have that ensure that residential leases include what is known as an implied warranty of habitability. That just simply means that you maintain the premises as habitable for a tenant. These are minimum standards that need to be met. What we're talking about here are things like access to clean water, access to heat and electricity, access to sanitation like a functioning bathroom, a rodent-free environment, fire-safe premises, and an environment that meets local building codes. That's what an implied warranty of habitability is. Now, the good news is that those things are generally going to be checked right before your purchase of the property by your home inspector. You or your manager just need to ensure that those conditions persist. Well, if you're a do-it-yourself landlord, are all of the loose ends of things like chasing down unpaid rent and handling maintenance punch lists and everything else stressing you out? Or if you just need a way to help make that more efficient, well then why don't you consider availing yourself of that? Check out avail.co. I hope that you learned some new perspectives on property management today. I have got to thank you for giving me the privilege of your time. I really appreciate it. If you regularly get value from Get Rich Education, I would really appreciate it if you simply tell a friend about the show. Until next week, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.